Well, hi, thank you very much, Kristen and Charles, for organizing this. It's great to be in discussion with this very interesting group of panelists you've assembled here. And I think the panel, in a sense, from what I can see, almost epitomizes for us something of the wealth of the book itself, which is a real feast. It's a fantastic resource, which I haven't even begun yet to fully digest, but I know it's something I'm going to return to again and again, because it brings together such an enormous number of thinkers, all of whom have grappled in one way or another with the problem of capitalism, but from such a wide range of different political commitments, different historical situations, and you really get a sense of a great feast, an intellectual feast of how rich the tradition of capital critique really is. That's especially welcome now, I would say, when the question of capitalism is once again on the agenda after some decades in which it was a relatively marginal concern of interest only to a few diehards like myself and I think others who are here. But why is everyone interested in capitalism now? Well, the answer is very obvious. We face a major general crisis of the entire planetary social order, a crisis of the sort that doesn't come along very often in the history of capitalism. By my count, there have been maybe 3, 4, at most 5 such general crises, meaning not a sectoral crisis of economy or of finance or of politics, but a crisis in which all sorts of different dimensions converge, including, I think, the one that is especially on many people's minds right now, the planetary ecological crisis, which I think is a strand of capitalist crisis. It's not a freestanding thing. So that explains why there's so much interest in capitalism, why I think this book is beautifully timed to provide a resource. There is a growing intuition, I would say, that the many injustices, impasses, sufferings, unhappinesses that people all over the globe face, which might have previously appeared to be disconnected from one another. A growing intuition that somehow, and the problem is to figure out exactly how, but somehow they must be connected, rooted in one and the same social system. A growing intuition that piecemeal reforms to address this problem or that problem in isolation from everything else will not be sufficient, that some sort of deep structural societal transformation is necessary to get out of this crisis. So that, of course, brings us to the question of capitalism, which for me, and I assume for many of you, is the master category for thinking about the social totality that is in crisis, that non-accidentally generates so many bads and so many wrongs. The underlying matrix that must somehow be changed to deal with this terrible impasse that we're in. So again, the big question is what is capitalism? How to understand it? And I would like to say that one thing I see in the book, having, let's say, so far only really dipped into it, one thing is that I see is that there is possibly a divide among those thinkers who are still interested in the somewhat unfashionable enterprise of a unified theory or a unified conception of capitalism versus those who think rather in terms of modes of articulation of different dimensions of capitalist society, and who are, let's say, more trepidatious about unified theory for understandable reasons, since it has been associated with untenable forms of base structure, orthodoxy, of class essentialism, all of the sort of teleology and determinism, all of these, objections to Marxism, not to mince the word, that have been so influential in recent times and have warned people off from capitalism, from Marxism, and from a unified theory. So my own take on this is to do the, and by the way, I'm speaking as a critical theorist, not an historian, not a sociologist, and I know we'll have other disciplinary perspectives and angles on this from other speakers. But speaking as a critical theorist, I want to actually defend the unfashionable enterprise of a unified theory of capitalism, one that I believe is not vulnerable to those objections of determinism, teleology, base superstructure, class essentialism, et cetera, et cetera. Some of you may have followed the stuff that I've written on this in recent years, but I'll give you a very, very quick take on it. And then, Kristen, please tell me when you need me to stop. I think I've been speaking about 10 minutes and I'll wrap it up within 10 for sure. Anyway, my take on this is that we should not think of capitalism as an economic system and then worry about how does it articulate with other things that are a part of society. And therefore, or even worse, we should not think of it as a theory of class understood in an orthodox way in terms of free waged workers in production and mining and so on, and then worry about how that articulates with the concerns of other social strata who are not, in that class defined in that traditional way. I'm saying that that's not a good way to think about capitalism. That's sort of what we used to call in the 70s, those are versions of dual or triple systems theory, or they're versions of what I mentioned before, a sort of hegemonic articulation theory. I think we need something more conceptually strong to understand what's going on. So my proposal is to say capitalism is not an economic system, but a larger institutionalized social order in which what is precipitated out as the official economy stands in very complex, and I would say very perverse relationships with its background conditions of possibility in other relatively non-economized zones of the social order. So I'm thinking of the relation, the problem is not the organization of production, for example. I mean, it is that, but it's not only that, it's also the relation between production and social reproduction, which includes all of those forms of unwaged care work, kin relations, and grassroots communities and so on that are not directly engaged in performing labor that can be exploited for profit, but that constitute absolutely indispensable presuppositions for the existence of exploited labor and for the accumulation of surplus value from it. So that's sort of one necessary background condition for the economy. Another, of course, is nature, which supplies the material substrate for labor to transform, which supplies the energy that powers human bodies and animal bodies and machines that are instrumental in that labor, that supplies many of the material inputs for production, the energy, as I said, and the general environmental conditions like breathable air, potable water, arable land, and so on and so forth, that without which none of this could happen. So that's a second essential, let's say, non-economic, or at least non-economized, non-capitalized precondition for a capitalist economy. And then we have to look at at expropriated wealth, unfree labor, stolen land, right? All of the wealth of peripheralized populations, including peripheralized populations within the capitalist core. All of that too is a necessary, in my view, presupposition for the sort of foreground picture of capitalism as a system in which the owners exploit the free waged labor for whose social reproduction they pay in wages. So there's a whole stream of expropriated labor and other forms of wealth that I think are necessary. And finally, public goods, public powers. None of this could happen without legal regimes, without forms of crisis management, without states and other public powers to ensure a money supply and infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So the economy, what we usually think of as capitalism, is deeply dependent on all of these other things. And what capitalism is a perverse way of organizing the relations among this economy and these background conditions. In a nutshell, I've taken to using the metaphor of cannibalization. I think that we're living in something we could call cannibal capitalism, which sets up a social system that essentially licenses, allows, and indeed incentivizes the capitalist class to cannibalize all of these background conditions of possibility, to suck dry the energy and creativity of working people, to scarf up nature and use it as a trash bin, to guzzle care work with zero concern for its reproduction and replenishment. And as I said, to devour the wealth and health and energies and resources of peripheralized and usually racialized people who lack or are deprived of, I should say, the actionable rights and political protections that could draw a line and say, no, you can't do that to us. Yeah. So, and of course, the devouring of public goods, public power, infrastructure. I mean, all of these things that I've just mentioned, if you think about it, are deeply material to the present COVID crisis, which is also, in my view, a crisis of capitalism. I don't want to take too much time. I think I'm out of time, but I think if we could, in theory, go through each of those background conditions I just mentioned: the ecological, the political, the social reproductive, the expropriative. We could go through each one of them and see how it has somehow, its crisis, the crisis created by its cannibalization, has converged in COVID, has deprived us of the public health infrastructure that we need to get a handle of it, has brought us the virus in the first place, thanks to global warming and tropical deforestation, which precipitated species migrations and zoonotic transfers, has devastated our infrastructure of care at the same time that it's put enormous burdens on it, and so on and so forth. So in a word, reading this book or parts of this book has prompted me to zero in on this question: how conceptualize capitalism? Do we want a sort of intersectionality perspective that tries to figure out how a bunch of different pieces that are fundamentally not integrally connected, not co-constitutive of one another, how they connect? Or do we want this kind of unified theory that I'm suggesting? And I realize the approach I'm suggesting is highly out of fashion, but to me, it begins to give us not only the conceptual tools we need to understand what's going on, but I would suggest, in addition, that it at least puts within our view the possibility of some vision of an expanded working class that is not limited to people who work in production, that could be a horizon for thinking about what sort of counter-hegemonic political force is needed to respond in a potentially efficacious and emancipatory way to the present crisis. My hunch is that the picture that goes with the articulation / intersectionality framework of coalition among all of the different forces in motion that might not have sufficient heft and sufficient glue to do the job of transformation that I think we need. And that maybe something like this expanded view of capitalism that I've given you, which I think would go with some kind of expanded view of the global working class, might be more efficacious. I realize that what I've said is highly fast and suggestive and not clearly articulated or argued, but these are the thoughts anyway, some of the thoughts that I got from reading the book and thinking about how it connects with what I've been doing in recent years. Thank you very much.